Next week, the self-appointed president of Syria, Ashara, is a welcome guest at the European Union in Brussels for, get this, a donor conference, so they can work out how much public money from European countries is going to be given to the former ISIS and Al-Qaeda deputy commander. Last week, the British government handed £50 million of public money to the very same regime in Damascus. In between were scenes of indescribable horror, of pogrom, of persecution on an almost biblical scale, where hundreds, maybe thousands, maybe 10,000 or more people were slaughtered in cold blood. They were men and women. They were old and young. They were even babies. There were people decapitated. There were people crucified before their brains were blown out at point blank range. And it was all carried out by the fanatic extremists who used to be called Al-Qaeda and ISIS and have since been rebranded HTS. The Western governments and some, but not all, clergy are throwing their hands up in horror, even though nothing in this world could have been more predictable than that the ISIS and Al-Qaeda savages would behave in power with even greater brutality, lethality, and complete degeneracy, given that they are now officially the government of Syria. The United Nations Security Council has been hastily convened in closed sessions behind doors as the powers work out what they're going to do about the massacre of Christians in the land where Jesus walked, where people who speak the language of Jesus, Aramaic, are being persecuted and are being massacred. The Alawite sect, a significant minority population on the coastal strip of Syria, in great cities like Latakia and Tartus, are being ruthlessly massacred in cold blood. That's the one characteristic that all the videos had in common. Their murderers were grinning as they killed them, and every one of the victims was unarmed, up close and personal against unarmed people. These ISIS and Al-Qaeda fighters are ruthless indeed. Now, of course, the Western powers are paralyzed in what they can say and do because everybody knows, or quite quickly could know, that they are the people responsible for putting the head-chopping, throat-cupping, heart-eating fanatics in power in the first place. The United States is under new management. Let's hope that the new management of the United States takes a different attitude to these savages than the last administration of Joe Biden did. If it does, then it is likely that some international move will have to be made to physically protect people from ISIS and Al-Qaeda. Our enemies at home, we're told, although a remarkable number of them seem to be being harbored in countries like Germany, in Britain, and in Norway, people openly posting they're glorying in the slaughter from safe havens in Europe. What could possibly go wrong? One day, these animals in human form with sharp knives may very well appear in a Christmas market or on a bridge or at a public event somewhere near you. Meanwhile, on the China front, things are hotting up. The United States administration does not seem to have a very different point of view towards China as Joe Biden's did. Trump and his ministers are openly declaring trade war on China. China says it's ready for any war, whether trade war, tariff war, or actual war. Are we on the brink again of World War III just in a different place from the one we feared. You've come to the right place to have it out with Galloway. Scott Ritter is a former United Nations weapons inspector, a US Marine Corps intelligence officer, and an author and analyst of the first rank. A seasoned military and geopolitical expert, he served as a military officer during Operation Desert Storm and later joined UNSCOM, overseeing Iraq's disarmament of weapons of mass destruction from 1991 to 1998, before resigning in protest. Ritter later became a leading critic of the Iraq War and US foreign policy in the Middle East, and I'm honored to say he joins us now. Scott Ritter, thanks for joining us. Everything we warned about as being as inevitable as that night follows day is now happening in Syria. Your thoughts, please.
No, you're absolutely right, George. First of all, thank you for having me here. This was predictable. It's just as predictable as what would happen in Libya if you remove Muammar Gaddafi. Anybody with an appreciation of Libyan history and the tribal and ethnic makeup of Libya knew that if you removed the force that provided stability, that chaos and anarchy and death and destruction would follow. We knew this in Iraq. Removing Saddam Hussein would lead to the same. We have a history of doing this, and now we have done so again in Syria, facilitating the removal of Bashar al-Assad. And we get what we pay for, chaos, anarchy, death, and destruction. I condemn my government. I condemn your government. I condemn Europe. I condemn all those who participated in the decades-long campaign to remove Bashar al-Assad, and the blood of the victims that are dying today are clearly on our collective hands. But I save a special condemnation for the Sunni Sunnah, the family of the Sunni faith. For some time now, I've been reaching out and having conversations with them, especially on the issue of Syria and the as a result, and Gaza, and the Palestinian issue. And it's interesting how, on the one hand, they can have so much sympathy for the Palestinian cause and speak of humanity and speak of the need to prevent a genocide and speak of the love and inherent good of the Islamic faith, a faith of peace, they tell me. And then watch as they turn 180 degrees and tolerate, in the name of their faith, this wanton massacre, murder done because people simply don't believe the way they believe. And they condemn people, they condemn them to death. They hunt them down as heretics. They slaughter them without any concern whatsoever about the humanity because they don't view them as humans. George, I'm having a hard time learning how to wrap my hands around this. I've spent a lot of time in the Middle East. I have a lot of tolerance for the Islamic faith in whatever form that it's put out, but I have become intolerant of the Sunni who sit by silently while this genocide of Alawites and Christians is being carried out, not only in their name, but in their identity, the identity of their faith.
Well, Scott, many of the people who carried me literally on their shoulders during my long stand for Iraq now pass by me and spit because I would not support happening to Syria what I had opposed happening to Iraq. So I understand where you're coming from, though it is worth mentioning that there are many reports now of senior Sunni clerics in Syria being assassinated for their condemnations of what has been happening over the last few days. And at least 26 families, Sunni families, to my certain knowledge, have been wiped out because they had given shelter to fleeing members of Syria's minority communities. But you are absolutely correct. There seems to be a disturbing duality in the minds of far too many people between the empathy they have for the people in Gaza under a pogrom and mass murder, and their, if not outright rejoicing in some cases, their complete indifference to what's happening on the ground. Can I ask you if there's any buyer's remorse in Washington? There's certainly none in London. David Lammy has just given them £50 million, guess what, to help them produce an inclusive government. And the people he presumably wanted to be included, their blood is running down the streets in Latakia and Tartus and elsewhere right now. What about Washington? Any rethink there?
Well, the proof is always in the pudding, but there are signs that the Trump administration will not be embracing the Biden administration's efforts when it comes to Syria. First of all, we have a director of national intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, who has repeatedly and vehemently pointed out that the Democrats, the Obama administration, the Biden administration had allied themselves with Al-Qaeda and ISIS in Iraq and in Syria, and that she condemned this. She viewed this as a grave threat to the national security of the United States. And today, her warnings on Syria, she stands vindicated. And she is the director of national intelligence. So she is the one who is briefing the president on the geopolitical situation, on the details of what's happening in Syria. Two, Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, has come out with a statement that has condemned what HTS is doing. This is the exact opposite of the statement that came out from the European Union, which blamed the deaths on the remnants of the Assad regime. Here, Marco Rubio clearly blames the perpetrators, HTS, and their fanatical supporters for what's happening. And three, and this is where, the Bob Dylan song, "The Times They Are Changing," comes to life. The United States and Russia are standing together and coming to the Security Council of the United Nations on the issue of Syria. I'll say that one more time in case your audience thought I misspoke. The United States and Russia are coming together on the issue of Syria, and they're going to take it to the Security Council. So I do think that we have an administration in Washington, D.C. that is taking a completely different direction than the Biden administration before them.
Tulsi Gabbard showed a great deal of courage because, of course, it nearly cost her her appointment. They relentlessly hunted her down as an Assad stooge, as a Putin stooge, but she never flinched and never backed off 1 inch.
No, look, let's just acknowledge that Tulsi Gabbard is first of all, she's a lady who has served her country with honor and dignity, and she continues to do so to this day. I know there are those in your audience and elsewhere, perhaps you yourself, and even myself, who are critical of her stance on Israel. That's one thing. But on the issue of Syria and on Russia, she has been a person of integrity and of courage, because she has stood up. She has stood for the right thing. She lets the facts speak. She lets her analysis be drawn from the facts. She is reality-based, and she has said things about the Assad regime. She has said things about Russia, which are the truth, but they fly in the face of the official policy directions that have been taken by the United States over decades. She goes not just against the politicians who are currently in power, but the establishment that that sustains this kind of Russophobic, anti-Assad, rhetoric and policies. She didn't flinch. She stood tall. She stood proudly, and she stood on the facts, and the facts have won out. The truth has won out. Tulsi Gabbard stands vindicated today, and that vindication gives her a great deal of moral authority now to speak about not just what the problem was, what the problem is, but what the solution should be.
What should they be, Scott? If this was Yugoslavia, NATO would be asserting its right to protect, to make a humanitarian intervention. They did that before. They're not likely, NATO, to do it now here, not least because they don't just know where the bodies are buried, they help to bury them. But it may be that the United States and Russia, maybe that Iraq next door, terrified at the cross-border potential of all of this, an emboldened ISIS, an emboldened Al-Qaeda, may very well spill over into Iraq. And of course, if in Iraq, then also in Iran, next door to Iraq. Is there any possibility of international intervention, protection for the suffering population in Syria?
Well, first of all, I want to point out when we speak of NATO that they did intervene in Libya on the artificial cause of trying to prevent a genocide that never happened. So, NATO at least pretends to have some moral authority. But as you said, regime change in Libya was not about genocide. It was about getting rid of Gaddafi. They don't really try to stop genocide in Syria. They've been facilitating it. And the only hope we have is for a Russian-American cooperation. Now, you mentioned Iran, and you mentioned, well, you didn't mention, but it should be mentioned as an extension of Iran, Hezbollah. Two organizations, one nation, one organization that have in the past stepped in to prevent this very kind of bloodshed taking place in Syria. I don't believe the United States would partner itself with either Hezbollah or Iran for a Syrian intervention, which is why I think the United States will be turning to Russia and saying that we have to do this ourselves, or else we create a situation that becomes inherently destabilizing, because if Iran and Hezbollah intervene in Syria, that threatens Israel, and now we have, a big problem, especially politically for the United States, who can't be seen as going against Israeli interests. So I do think we may see the United States and Russia working together to do compelled humanitarian assistance, using Russia as the primary vehicle to flow humanitarian aid in, but having the United States backing Russia politically and, if necessary, militarily. While the Russians have a military force in Syria, it's not of the size that could allow it to directly confront HTS and prevail over the long term without significant reinforcement, which Russia's not in a position to do. But backed by American air power and the threat of American air power, the Russians would be able to, have greater response. I can't predict the future. I don't know what it is they're going to be talking about in the Security Council, but I would imagine that it's some sort of compelled humanitarian assistance that brings an end to this fighting, brings assistance to the populations on the Syrian coast, and maybe will lead to some sort of political accommodation that prevents this kind of massacre going forward. I just want to say that this is historic. The notion that the United States and Russia, I mean, just put yourself back 6 months, put yourself back a year. Could you imagine the United States and Russia standing side by side on any cause, let alone Syria, where we were deemed to be enemies who may come to blows? The world has changed. And in this case, in terms of U.S.-Russian relations, it's changed for the better.
Well said. I know how valuable your time is, how much in demand you are. So time for only one other observation, if you will. The war is the proxy war that Rubio and General Kellogg described between the US and Russia over the bodies of the people in Ukraine is, it would appear, on its way to a solution. There will be many problems between that and the cup and the lip, as it were. But it hasn't calmed in the South China Sea. The rhetoric is flying in the South China Sea, the trade war, tariff war, and threats of more are flying on the China front. Are you concerned about that, or is this just Trump's art of the deal type rhetoric, that he is waving a big stick but knows he's going to have to sit down and iron out his arguments with China?
Trump's art of the deal is one of the more difficult concepts to grasp your head around, especially if you have traditional logic, because oftentimes what he does makes no sense whatsoever. But it makes sense to him. And I take him at face value when he said two things about China. He's not looking for a war. The fact is, he calls himself the president of peace. So it wouldn't make any sense that he seeks peace with Russia, seeks peace in the Middle East, and yet is pursuing a policy towards armed conflict with China. I don't think that's the direction he wants to go. And there are some indications that he is looking to de-escalate on the issue of Taiwan and elsewhere. His big problem is the economy, the American economy, and the fact that China is a major competitor that it's out of control in terms of the United States. We don't have any ability to control what's going on vis-a-vis the United States and China economically. I think that his tariff war that he's doing is done for two reasons. One, to send a signal to China that we need to fix, that this is a problem that needs to be fixed. And so if you're going to say something's a problem, why not make it more of a problem? And two, we are looking at a revolution in the United States. I just want to remind everybody that they will say, well, why would Trump, seek, to redefine U.S.-Chinese economic relations? Why would he seek sanctions? Why would he do any of the things that he's doing? A $36 trillion debt that's going to grow to $54 trillion before you blink an eye. The American economy is headed in the wrong direction. And I think Trump believes there needs to be fundamental changes. And fundamental changes mean just that. Fundamental changes about every aspect of how we do business. I think Trump's looking to redefine the U.S.-Chinese economic relationship in a way that is to the benefit of the United States, that is sustainable. I don't know what that's going to look like. I don't even know if Trump knows what's that going to look like. But I do know this. Today we got word that China is preparing to receive Donald Trump in April for a state visit where he will sit down with Xi Jinping to discuss these and other issues. And I think that's what all this is about. This is about creating the chaos, creating the anarchy so that the two men can sit down and redefine how they want to work with each other going forward. And hopefully that will be in a way that emphasizes the economic and de-emphasizes the military.
Scott Ritter, always an education talking to you. Thank you very much indeed for joining us on Have It Out with Galloway. Let's go to Gaza for an update. Never forget Gaza. Hayam Taha with an update from the Gaza Strip. What can you tell us about the situation in the Gaza Strip right now, this day?
First of all, I just want to say I'm sorry if the connection is bad, but as you can know, it's very hard for us to find a stable connection. I hope you can hear me well.
Yes, I can, ma'am. Please proceed.
Okay, so I'm currently now in Gaza Strip after the displacement journey that I have been through. And it was hard at first, like coming back to Gaza, seeing everything leveled to the ground, seeing everything around us, the neighborhood, your home, everything was destroyed. So it was hard at first. It's still getting harder by the second, but I'm trying to manage, or I'm trying to survive as hard as I can.
So they've now again cut off the electricity. They've cut off the aid trucks, which are forbidden now, in complete breach of the ceasefire agreement, which got the endorsement of all world leaders. How are people coping with being plunged back into the worst days, minus the large-scale air raids and bombing carnage. But in terms of the necessary means of life, they've all been stopped again. What's the reaction of the public to that?
Okay, so we don't cope or we don't get used to stuff like that. We don't have any other choice. So Palestinians are not coping with everything that's been happening to them. They're just forced to do that. So the only thing that was different from the genocide was the stopping of the sound of the bombing. Everything else harder. We don't have electricity, yes. We don't have fuel. Fuel is very, very expensive, if existed. We don't have water, and fortunately, I thank God, half of my home is fine. So I managed to stay with my family at our home, but I'm living at the sixth floor. So I have to hold the bags of water over the sixth floor for 4 to 6 times every day because we want water upstairs. So no water, no electricity, and as you mentioned, the first aid, it's Ramadan now, and we're back to canned food. We're back to finding nothing in the shops. No chicken, no beef, nothing from the aids.
And are you aware that the United States were directly negotiating with the Palestinian resistance in Cairo, and that the negotiator is now in difficulties because he spoke in a human way about those negotiations? Are you hopeful that these negotiations can bear fruit?
So if we are going to talk about anything that's happening in a human way, I can't say that we can. This is not how human is treated. And about the negotiations, no, I don't have high hopes because since the ceasefire started, nothing's changed, as I told you before. Only the sound of the bombing that stopped. But we are still in a very small cage and we don't have anything still. So what's the point? What's the difference if there is massacres that's happening, if there's killing, very essentials of living? We don't have it here. So what's the point of negotiations if they are not following the terms that put at the first place? They are not entering any aids. They are not entering anything. And don't get me wrong, we're not animals. We don't only need food. We want hospitals. We want treatments. We want everything. I'm a pharmacist, by the way, and I had very difficult time finding an injection for me. I had a very weird backache from holding the bags of the water, and was trying to find a diclofenac injection for me to take, and I couldn't find any. We don't have any treatment. If a hospital is it's a very small place now. It's only a room. No hospitals for children. I am very scared that one of my nieces or nephews get sick or anything. What would they do? It's not about first aid. It's not about food. It's not about fuel even. It's about reviving Gaza, and that's not happening, and it's not going to happen anytime soon. So I don't really care about the negotiations because nothing is standing next to us and the terms are not happening. So why would I care?
Devastating testimony. Thank you for giving it, though it will have been profoundly upsetting, of course, to all right-thinking people. Let's go to London. Fatima Nasser is in London. Fatima, what would you like to say?
Okay, so given the recent escalation on the sectarian violence in Syria, particularly targeting the Alawite minority, following the fall of Assad's regime. What measures should the international community take to support the new government establishing peace and preventing further atrocities?
Well, the new government is the source of the atrocities. The new government is the reason for the atrocities, because that's what they are. A scorpion stings because it's a scorpion. An ISIS Al-Qaeda government slaughters people for sectarian reasons because they are ISIS and Al-Qaeda. So I care nothing about helping this so-called government, and it is a mark of shame on our government that only days before this latest slaughter, we handed them £50 million of your money and my money. I'm hopeful that the Security Council will assert a right to protect. Now, in the past, I would have been more concerned about the offense, the affront to national sovereignty, and so on, in that kind of thing. But frankly, I'm now only interested in saving the lives of hundreds of thousands of people who might get their throats cut any minute. And if the United States and Russia will take the necessary security measures that will protect these people from being slaughtered, then I'm ready to support that. So far as I'm concerned, Syria as a state no longer exists. It is occupied, 1/3 of it occupied by Netanyahu, roughly another third of it occupied by Turkey and its allies, and only a third of it is under the control of these Takfiri fanatics, and that not necessarily forever. So my heart bleeds for the people of Syria, including, I reiterate, those Sunni Syrians who gave their lives in the last few days trying to protect their neighbors, trying to give shelter and hide their neighbors, or in the case of the Sheikh from Idlib, speaking out against the slaughter. So let's wait and see what the Security Council comes up with, Fatima. I realize it's uncharted waters. Can the United States and Russia cooperate on anything at all? Well, Syria will be an interesting test case in that regard. Thank you. Let me stay in London and talk with Andrew Thompson in London. Andrew, what would you like to say?
Hi, George. Thanks for having me on again. The question was about October the 7th and what's happened subsequent to that, and whether you think that operation itself, if you take outside the morality of it and everything else, how would that be perceived by the resistance, whether it was a success, and also as well, like whether you think it's likely to happen again?
Well, I'll resist your temptation, as I did last time, to candidly speak on that. As you well know, I could be arrested at the door of the studio if I were to speak candidly on that. As colleagues of mine have been, Richie Medhurst is now on the 11th month of bail under the Terrorism Act for speaking candidly about that. So this is the second time you've asked me the same question. What I will say is that history will judge the actions of everyone involved on October 7th and after October 7th. And I'll confine my comment, as I did last time, to saying this: such is the unending, unendurable misery that the Palestinian people have been subjected to for 78 years. The remarkable thing is that there's not an October 7th every other week. Let me go to Jerusalem and talk to Mashadar Musa in occupied Jerusalem. Mashadar, always a pleasure to hear from you. What would you like to say?
2 days ago, Donald Trump, he tweeted about dead bodies. And he said, if the one he kept the dead bodies, they are twisted and sick people. So from here, I just want to talk about what happened to my brother. My brother, the Israeli occupation murdered him on.
This is a great pity because I wanted to hear that story. Let me go to my old friend in Belfast, man who traveled to Gaza with me, Fra Hughes. Always welcome, Fra. What would you like to say?
Well, George, thank you very much for having me on the show. I wanted to congratulate you first of all. I heard you say you have now up to 4 million viewers for the Mother of All talk shows. That's absolutely fantastic, and as an opportunity and as a vehicle to get out the truth of what's happening with a world perspective is absolutely brilliant. Congratulations. So I wanted to talk about HTS and I wanted to talk about Syria. And specifically, I mean, the Balkanization and a weakened Syria is obviously in the interest of Zionism and the interest of Turkey now because they're occupying part of the country. But with the Zionists on the Hermon Heights and also on 5 hilltops in southern Lebanon with that strategic overview and artillery range on southern Lebanon. And the fact that HTS has said that their enemies aren't Zionists, their enemies are the Shia, as we're witnessing these horrendous murders taking place, and their enemies are Hezbollah and Iran. I would be concerned going forward that in any future confrontation between the Zionists and the resistance in southern Lebanon, that there could well be a second front opened on the Syrian border by HTS as fellow travellers of the Zionists. So do you think that's a possibility? And do you think we're watching and witnessing the full and total balkanization of Syria in the interests of the West and also Zionists?
Well, I don't know if it will turn out to be in the interests of the West, but balkanization is almost complete, as you yourself said. The Netanyahu regime has seized not just the strategic heights that you referred to, but Quneitra and way down towards the border is now Israeli occupied territory. Indeed, they have openly said they will annex 3 Syrian provinces, plus the Golan Heights that they already annexed a couple of decades ago. That would mean a huge expansion in Israel's territory. Whether they annex it or not, or merely continue to occupy it, that land is now, you might say, forever, or at least for the foreseeable future, outside of Syria. The province of Idlib and the other parts where the Kurdish movements are still in control, and Aleppo, which has become effectively, again, going back to the Ottoman times, a Turkish city and a jewel in the crown of the former Ottoman Empire, has now reverted back to being a Turkish city. So balkanization, whilst horrific, is frankly now the least of our worries. The greatest of our worries is a continuation of the pogrom, which, according to some sources, slaughtered 7,000 people in a single week, less than a week, earlier last week. And in the most horrific, brutal, and savage ways. I mean, there are no good ways of dying, but there are some ways that are worse than others. And these people, many of them, suffered the very worst of deaths at the hands of these fanatics. And so bringing a halt to that must be our first priority. And so if the Russian airbase at Tartus is going to become effectively the hub of safe haven for the people of these provinces, then I think we should welcome that. And if the United States and Russia are going to work together in the Security Council to effectively create safe havens for the Syrian people, safe from the foreign fighters. Let's not forget that. Syria is occupied not just by the people I've already mentioned. Syria is occupied by Uzbeks and Tajiks and Algerians and Uyghurs and former restaurant waiters from Cardiff in South Wales. I mean, this is an international gang of fanatic extremists clustered around the ISIS and Al-Qaeda brands. These people are occupying Syria just as much as Netanyahu is occupying Syria in the almost 1/3 now of the territory that he controls. So my immediate concern is to stop the bloodshed of minorities at the hands of these fanatics. And frankly, anybody who can do it will have my support. Let me go back to Mushadar Musa in occupied Jerusalem. I hope we've got a better line this time, Mushadar. Welcome back to the show. What would you like to say? You were telling us about your brother who was murdered by the occupation.
My brother was murdered in Jerusalem here on the checkpoint, 2020, so 4 years ago. And the occupation, Israeli occupation, are still holding his dead body until today. So Trump, he said about the one who kept the dead body, they are sick and twisted. And he talked about the people who is held in Gaza. So what about my brother dead bodies and 250 dead bodies, more than 250 dead bodies are in the refrigerators in Israel before 7th of October. My question to Donald Trump, do you support necrophilia when it comes to Israel? That my question to him.
Well, Trump is probably completely ignorant of these 250 dead bodies in the refrigerator. And if he wasn't ignorant, if he knew about it, obviously he would care less about them, because from the point of view of the Western world, Palestinians are children of a lesser God. Even Christians in Palestine and in Syria are children of a lesser God. For Western politicians, journalists, and even Christian leaders in the West seem to have a different attitude to Christians in the East, even though by any standards, Jesus himself came from the East. But let me ask you a question, if I can. What reason do the Israeli authorities give your family for holding on for now almost 5 years to the body of your late brother? Do they give a reason at all?
Maybe they want to, it's like punish for my family. Maybe they want to use his skin for forensic science, because you can expect anything from this occupation. George, we have asked Red Cross, we have asked many organizations, human rights organizations, to ask the Israeli occupation to bring the dead bodies for religious connotation, but they didn't obey. They didn't listen to anyone. Even my mother, she sent a video, recorded video to United Nations, and they hear that video and no one cares about this. And this 4 years ago, and we still want our dead bodies, my brother dead bodies, to bury him. My brother dead body still in refrigerator, and I think in Tel Aviv University, I don't know where exactly, but we want to bury him. And the other also 250 dead bodies, maybe more than 250 dead bodies, George.
It is an unpardonable crime, and the hearts of everyone watching this will have gone out to you in the painful sincerity with which you advance a demand which no human being who was truly human could possibly refuse. Not only is it illegal what they have done with the remains of your brother and the 250 minimum of others, it is immoral in the extreme to deny a family the right to bury their own deceased. And as to how it squares with a state which claims to be based on religion, well, words fail me. Thank you for that call. Fadi Ekder is in Gateshead in England. Fadi, you're probably the last caller. What would you like to say?
Good evening, Mr. George. Thank you for having me back. I had I want to set up the scene for the tariff wars, or how I can see them, or how I see them. Mr. Trump words and indications have been following certain countries, which are China, Mexico, Canada, and even Japan, Germany, in that order because of the quantity they export to the US. The China tariffs, just a footnote, it's not since this Trump. No, it was since Biden and the Trump before it, and they've been acting on it all the time. The only country that has the same power as the US or equivalent is China. That's why the tariffs are on China, and he doesn't want to have a confrontation, in my opinion. He does also, I mean, the force, he states the force to Canada, he states it to Mexico, we will take it, Greenland, we will take it by force or any other means. The dressing of all this is to put all these countries together to, let me rephrase that. He puts all these countries together under the tariffs war while window dressing them, but he gives leeway to Canada and to Mexico and just expands on the time of the commitment of the tariffs. My question would be, besides that Trump is trying to divide BRICS, approximation to Russia against Ukraine, doing commercial agreements with India, sanctions and tariffs tariffs on Brazil, a lot of instability in South Africa, and the tariffs on China. I don't think, well, as Scott Ritter just said, I don't think he wants to do any wars.
I don't think so, but we've run out of time, I'm afraid, to allow your question to go on any longer, but the audience will certainly have grasped the point that you have been making. You've got to make a distinction between what Trump says and what he actually does. He has not seized Greenland. He has not invaded Canada. He goes about his business with brute force in a rhetorical sense, but as yet, no brute force in a kinetic sense. Indeed, he's trying to withdraw from the kinetic engagement against Russia on the Ukrainian track. We must hope that whilst tariffs will fly and insults will fly, and the insults towards Canada must be deeply wounding to the Canadian psyche, as Canada has been such a slavish servant of the United States for so many decades. Ditto Denmark. But sticks and stones break your bones. Words will never harm you. I just hope that Trump sticks to the words. It's been marvelous for me. I hope it was for you. And if it was, come back next week at the same time in the same place and bring another viewer with you. I've been George Galloway, and you've been having it out with Galloway. Thanks for watching.